The first thing Nora noticed was that the babysitter did not blink, not when the porch light snapped on. Not when the dead moth skittered in the yellow glow. Not when Owen, clutching the hem of Nora's shirt with one sticky little hand, peered around her leg and whispered, "Why is she smiling like that?" Nora almost laughed because children said strange things, and because the woman on the front step looked perfectly normal in every other way. Young, maybe 22. Gray coat buttoned to the throat despite the warmth of the house. Dark hair braided neatly over one shoulder. A canvas bag hanging from her wrist. She stood with her hands folded in front of her as if she had been placed there by a careful pair of unseen hands and told not to move until spoken to. But Owen was right. The smile was wrong. It was too fixed, too patient. Not cheerful, not shy. Just present like something drawn on and forgotten. "You're early," Nora said. The woman tilted her head by a fraction. Traffic was kinder than expected. Her voice was soft and even, pleasant enough, but it had a strange quality to it, as if she were speaking from the far end of a tiled hallway. Nora found herself leaning forward to catch it. Beside her, Owen pressed harder against her leg. Nora looked past the woman out into the street. The neighborhood sat quiet beneath a low-autumn sky, the cul-de-sac washed in the silver blue of evening. Leaves scraped along the curb. Across the road, the Hendersons' upstairs window glowed and someone moved behind sheer curtains. Everything looked ordinary. The kind of ordinary that made you feel guilty for imagining anything else. "You must be Mara," Nora said.
"Yes."
Nora hesitated, fingers still on the lock. The agency had called that afternoon to say her regular sitter was sick and they were sending a replacement fully vetted, experienced, available immediately. Nora had nearly canceled dinner with Elias. She should have canceled. But the reservation had been impossible to get, and the past 2 months of her life had been an exhausting procession of hospital visits, school calls, and sleepless nights after the divorce papers were finally signed. One dinner, 2 hours, maybe 3. She had wanted one adult evening so badly it embarrassed her. "I'll need to see some ID," she said. Mara reached into her coat pocket and held out a laminated card. Her hand was pale and unnaturally still. Nora took the badge. The photo matched. The logo from the agency sat in the corner. The expiration date was current. Everything looked legitimate, and yet the plastic felt colder than it should have, as though it had just come from a freezer. Owen made a tiny sound. Nora handed the badge back.
"Sorry, you know how it is."
"I do," Mara said, and smiled exactly the same way she had before. Still without blinking, the thin current of unease moved through Nora, quick as a draft under a door. She told herself she was tired. She told herself stress made everything feel uncanny. She stepped aside. "Come in." Mara crossed the threshold, and the temperature in the entryway seemed to drop by several degrees. It was subtle. So subtle Nora might have imagined it. Yet the warm smell of roasted chicken lingering from dinner thinned at once beneath something older and stranger, a scent like wet stone and iron. Mara paused just inside the house, lifting her face slightly, and for one disorienting second Nora had the distinct impression that the woman was listening not to them, but to the house itself, to the walls, to the pipes, to the slow-stilling creaks in the ceiling. Then she looked down at Owen. "Hello," Mara said. Owen buried his face against Nora's hip. "He's shy," Nora said too quickly. "No," Mara replied. That made Nora look up. Mara's eyes were on the child, calm and dark and strangely reflective like polished seeds.
"He is not shy," she said.
"He remembers." The hallway seemed to narrow around them. Nora let out a brittle laugh. "Remembers what?" But Mara had already turned her head toward the living room, as though she hadn't heard the question. The house was small but old, a 2-story colonial with a steep roof and too many noises in winter. Nora had bought it with Elias 6 years earlier because he loved character in old windows and moldings and the idea of raising a child somewhere with history. After he left, the house had become too large in strange ways. Certain corners felt occupied even when empty. The upstairs landing was always colder than the rooms it connected. Twice Nora had found the nursery rocking chair gently moving when no one was near it, though Owen hadn't slept in that room in years. "You notice things more when you're alone." "Mommy," Owen whispered. She crouched beside him. His cheeks were warm. His lashes clumped with the remnants of tears from an earlier tantrum.
What is it?
He kept his eyes on Mara.
She was in my room.
When? Before you opened the door. Children stitch dreams into daylight all the time. They said impossible things with solemn conviction and forgot them an hour later. Still, the words landed heavily. Mara set down her canvas bag near the stairs. Would you like me to wash my hands? The question was normal enough to feel like a rescue rope. Nora straightened. Yes. Off course. Kitchen's through there. Mara nodded and moved toward the back of the house with noiseless steps. Nora waited until she was out of sight, then bent close to Owen. Listen to me, baby. You're okay. She just got here. No, she didn't. Yes, she did. Owen looked up at her with the clear, wounded seriousness only children possess. I heard her singing in my room when I was taking my dinosaur nap. A prickling sensation crept up Nora's arms. From the kitchen came the sound of the faucet running. Steady. Normal. You probably heard the TV, Nora said. We didn't have the TV on. He was right. They hadn't. Nora stood and forced herself to breathe. Her thoughts had begun doing that dangerous thing where they gathered every oddity from the past few months and tried to stack them into a shape. The nursery rocker moving. Owen waking in the night and talking to Simone in the corner. The little handprints she'd once found on the inside of the upstairs hallway window, too high up for him to have made, too elongated to belong to an adult. Elias had said she needed sleep.
He had said the house was old, that old houses shifted and Sayyidan played tricks. Elias had also left. That thought came with its usual clean edge of bitterness. Mara returned from the kitchen drying her hands on a paper towel. The water on her finger had not seemed to touch her skin. Her hands were as pale and dry as before. Nora realized she was staring.
Sorry.
You have had many. The paper towel slipped from Nora's fingers and landed by her shoe.
What?
Mara's expression did not change. Your eyes, she said. They look like people who no longer sleep. Nora should have been reassured by the concern in the words, but there was none in the tone. It sounded observational, not sympathetic. Like a scientist noting weather. She checked the time on the microwave. 7:11 a.m. p.m. Elias would be at the restaurant by 8. The drive was 20 minutes. She should have already been getting her bag, going over emergency contacts, pointing out the snacks Owen was allowed and the ones he wasn't. Instead, she stood in her own kitchen feeling like a trespasser.
Right, she said briefly.
Okay, here's the routine. Owen needs to be in bed by 9. Heckin' watch one episode of anything on the kid's profile, but nothing with fighting, because then he won't sleep. He likes apple slices, but only if they're peeled. Which is ridiculous, and there's leftover pasta in the fridge if he gets hungry later. My number is on the board. Mrs. And her son across the street has a spare key if Mara looked toward the front of the house. Nora stopped. Did you hear that? Mara asked. They both stood still. At first, Nora heard nothing but the refrigerator hum and the ticking clock over the sink. Then from upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Not the quick crack of old wood settling, but a slow, deliberate weight shifting from one foot to another. Owen whimpered. Nora's scalp tightened. Probably the windows, she said too quickly. Because every ink knew old houses made noise, and because the alternative lodged in her throat like a bone. Mara's gaze remained fixed on the ceiling. There is someone in the second bedroom. The words hit Nora with such force that she laughed, a sharp involuntary sound.
No, there isn't.
Yes, I was up there 10 minutes ago. Mara looked at her then, and for the first time the smile changed, not wider, not brighter, but thinner, as though something beneath it had become interested. That does not mean it is empty now. The silence that followed felt enormous. Nora's first instinct was anger, absurd and hot. Maybe because fear would have been too humiliating. Look, I don't know what kind of joke you think this is, but my son is Ryther. Mara lowered her head in something that might have been apology. You were right. I should not have said it that way. Another creak overhead. This one unmistakably crossed the floor. Owen clamped his hands over his ears. Nora's mouth had gone dry. She grabbed the largest knife from the drying rack before she even registered doing it. The steel flashed in the kitchen light.
Stay here. I would rather come with you. No. Stay.
With him. The words sounded brave enough, almost practical, but Nora's pulse had become a violent flutter under her skin. She moved into the hallway and toward the staircase, each step feeling both urgent and impossible. Halfway there, she became aware of how quiet the house was. No cars passing outside. No TV from the neighbors. Even the ticking clock had seemed to recede. The old house listened. The staircase rose into darkness, the upstairs hall lamp left off to save electricity. The landing pooled with shadow. Nora set one foot on the first step and groaned. The second step was worse. By the third, she could hear her own breathing and hated it. On the fourth, she stopped because she had become certain without any reason she could name that someone was standing at the top of the stairs just beyond the reach of the hall light from below. Waiting for her to come high enough to see, she couldn't make herself move.
Mommy?
Owen called faintly from the kitchen. The sound snapped the paralysis. Nora climbed. The hallway upstairs smelled faintly of lavender detergent and old plaster. Moonlight leaked through the landing window, silvering the wallpaper. To the left was the bathroom. To the right, her bedroom. At the far end sat the second bedroom, the old nursery, now mostly used for storage. Its door stood open 6 inches. Nora was certain she had closed it. Her grip tightened on the knife so hard her fingers hurt. "Who's there?" she called, hating how small her voice sounded. No answer. She took 3 slow steps down the hall. Something brushed the inside of the room. Cloth, maybe. Or hair dragging over cardboard. Nora reached the door and shoved it wide. Moonlight spilled over stacked boxes, the dismantled crib frame. The rocker by the window. No person. No movement. Nothing. The relief that flooded her was so sudden it almost made her dizzy. She laughed once, breathless and ashamed. Of course there was nothing. Stress, lack of sleep, a strange babysitter. A child with an active imagination, she had let all of it get into her head. Then she saw the rocking chair. It was moving, slowly, not enough that the runners touched wood with sound. Just enough for the curved shadows beneath it to shift. Forward, back. Forward. Nora stopped breathing. The nursery had not been used in years. Nobody sat there. Nobody touched the chair because every time she looked at it, she remembered the nights she spent half delirious and aching, feeding Owen while dawn leaked cold and gray through the curtains. And the darker nights after, when she stood over his crib, convinced something in the corner was watching him. Sleep. The chair kept rocking. On the seat lay something she had never seen before, a small red ribbon. Nora stared. Her skin felt suddenly too tight for her body. She knew every object in this room. Every box of baby clothes she had not donated, every stuffed animal with one eye missing, every yellowing book with teeth marks in the corners. That ribbon did not belong her. Below, from the first floor, she heard Owen scream. Not cry. Not call for her. Scream. Nora spun and ran. She nearly fell on the stairs, shoulder scraping the wall hard enough to leave paint under her sleeve. Owen screamed again, a strangled animal sound that turned her bones to ice. She flew down the remaining steps and hit the hallway at full speed, knife raised. Heart battering her ribs. The kitchen was empty. The back door stood open to the dark yard. Cold night air poured inside. For 1 second, Nora thought both of them were gone. Then she heard Owen sobbing from the living room. She rushed in and found him crouched behind the couch, hands over his head, eyes squeezed shut. The television was black. The lamp beside the armchair had gone out. The room glowed only with weak porch light leaking through the front windows. "Owen!" She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. He was shaking so violently his teeth clicked. What happened? Where is she? He couldn't answer. He only pointed toward the front hall. Nora looked up. Mara stood by the open front door, one hand on the knob, her silhouette framed by the porch light. Her coat hung perfectly smooth. Her braid rested over one shoulder. That same small, careful smile sat on her face. Then behind her on the porch outside stood another woman. Same gray coat, same canvas bag, same braided dark hair, same fixed smile. Nora's body turned cold all at once, as if every drop of blood had fled inward. The woman outside lifted one hand and knocked gently on the already open door. 3 soft taps. Then she said, in that same distant voice from the end of a tiled hall, "I'm sorry I'm late. I'm Mara, from the agency." For one impossible second, Nora thought her mind had split. The woman on the porch stood in the halo of the yellow light with rain beginning to silver shoulders of her gray coat. The woman inside the house stood perfectly still with one hand resting on the open door. They wore the same clothes, the same braid,
The same careful smile.
even from where Nora crouched on the living room rug, clutching her son so tightly he whimpered. She could see that their faces matched in the exact way twins never did, not likeness. Identity, Doc Hoppy standing in her doorway, another already in her house. The knife nearly slipped from her damp hand. The woman outside tilted her head.
Miss Vale.
Don't move. The woman inside turned first. It was such a small motion, barely more than the shift of a bird noticing a sound, but something in it made every nerve in Nora's body flare. She had the sudden, nauseating feeling that the thing in her hallway had forgotten, for just an instant, which face it was wearing. Then it looked toward the porch and smiled wider. Not enough that a stranger would notice, but enough that Nora saw too many teeth. Owen dug his fingers into her arm and began to make a thin, breathless sound that was almost a prayer and almost a sob. Mommy.
That's the one from my room.
Nora backed away on her knees, dragging him with her until her shoulders hit the couch. Get out of my house, she said, though she wasn't sure which one she was speaking to. The woman on the porch blinked. It was the smallest movement in the world. And because of it, Nora wanted to cry with relief. The one inside did not. The real Mara, or the one who seemed more real because she did that ordinary human thing, looked from Nora to the figure in the hall. And whatever professional warmth she had brought with her fell away. Her expression sharpened into something alert and alarmed. She took one step back off the threshold. Oh, she said very softly. The thing inside the house turned its head toward Nora. Its eyes were still dark. Its face was still the same face. But the room seemed to dim around it, as if the light had become reluctant to touch its skin. You should not have opened the door, it said. The voice was unchanged, but Nora heard now what had been wrong with it before. Not an itch, not distance, layering. Like another voice lived under it and spoke a fraction of a second later in perfect agreement. The porch woman moved fast. She lunged into the doorway and slammed one hand against the frame with a crack that made Nora flinch. Mrs. Vale, she snapped, and her voice had none of that strange softness now. Take your son and get behind me, right now. Nora did not move. Her body had become thick and stupid with fear, every instinct firing at once. None useful. She could only stare as the thing in the hall slowly turned toward the new arrival.
What are you?
Nora whispered. Dither answered. The porch woman reached inside her coat pocket and drew out something small and metallic on a chain. It flashed dull silver in the porch light. Not a cross, not exact. It looked older than that, a knot of interlock shapes hammered flat and worn smooth by years of handling. The moment it appeared, the smell in the room changed. Wet iron. Soil after lightning. Something burned and buried. The thing inside the house took one silent step. Backward. Owen buried his face in Nora's chest and screamed. That broke the paralysis. Nora grabbed him under the arms and staggered to her feet.
What is happening? She shouted.
Kitchen, the real Mara said. Now. The thing in the hall moved. It didn't run. Nora would almost have preferred running. Instead, it crossed the distance with a terrible smoothness. One moment by the door and the next halfway down the hall, coat brushing the wallpaper with a dry whisper. It was like watching frames missing from a film. Nora stumbled toward the kitchen with Owen clinging to her neck, his legs wrapped around her waist. Behind her, Mara shouted something in a language Nora didn't know, sharp, hard syllables that seemed to strike the walls like thrown nails. The hallway lights exploded all at once. Glass rained into the entryway. Owen shrieked against her shoulder. Dora hit the kitchen, nearly slipped on the tile, and turned in time to see the two women facing one another through the dark hall. The open front door banged once in a sudden wind. The porch light flickered. The shape on Mara's chain swung and flashed. The thing wearing Mara's face stood with its head slightly bowed, as though listening. Then all the lights in the house went out. The darkness was total. Nora heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize. Somewhere in the black, Owen was sobbing into her neck, hot tears soaking her collarbone. The refrigerator hum died. The clock over the sink stopped mid-tick. Even the hiss of the rain outside seemed to fall away. The silence that took its place was not natural silence. It had weight, pressure. It pressed against Nora's eardrums until she thought they might burst. Then, from 3 feet away, "In the dark kitchen, Mommy," said Owen's voice, but Owen was in her arms, every muscle in Nora's body locked. The voice came again from beside the pantry door, sweet and tremulous and perfectly pitched to her child's.
Mommy, it's cold.
Nora couldn't breathe. She clutched Owen harder. He gave a startled cry, real and immediate against her shoulder. The other voice laughed softly from the darkness. The hand found Nora's elbow. She screamed and slashed wildly with the knife.
Stop.
"It's me." A tiny beam of pale light clicked on near the floor. Mara held a narrow flashlight between 12 fingers, its weak circle aimed downward. Her face had changed. Not in the monstrous way Nora feared, but in the ordinary way fear changes a real face. The false calm was gone. Her skin looked gray. Rain had dampened the loose strands near her temples. There was blood on the side of her wrist, a thin black line cutting toward her palm. Nora stared at the blood. It looked wrong in the flashlight beam, too dark, almost brown, as though it had seeped out of old wood rather than skin. Mara followed her gaze and curled her fingers over the wound. "Not mine," she said. Something moved at the far end of the kitchen. The flashlight snapped up. For an instant, Nora saw only the table. 2 half-finished glasses of water, Owen's crayon scattered by his coloring. Book, then a face slid out of the dark just beyond the beam. Her own, not a resemblance. Not a trick of light. Nora's face looked back at her from the doorway to the laundry room, hair pinned in the loose knot she wore at home. Mouth bent in the tired half-smile she used when she wanted Owen not to worry. Its eyes shone slick and black and dark. "Don't," it said in Nora's voice. "You're frightening him." The knife dropped from Nora's hand and clattered across the tile. Mara shoved past her, snatching a glass from the table and hurling the water straight at the shape in the doorway. The water struck with a sound like fat hissing in a hot pan. The thing wearing Nora's face recoiled. For one impossible second, its features ran, not melted, not blurred, but rearranged, as if her face had only been laid over something beneath it, like wet paper over wire. The beam caught too much, and not enough. A vertical slit where a mouth should be. A fold of skin bending the wrong direction. No eyes at all. Only polished dark surfaces like the backs of beetles. Then it was Nora again. Then Mara. Then Owen. Pale oval with no features except a smile. It withdrew into the laundry room with a skittering sound that no body of that size should have been able to make. Nora doubled over and vomited on the floor. Owen screamed in sympathy, though he couldn't have seen much. He had his face jammed into her neck, his small body rigid with terror. Nora wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and tasted bile and salt. "What is that?" she whispered. Mara kept the flashlight trained on the doorway. "I don't know its oldest name. Oldest I know what people call it now." Thunder rolled low outside, but it sounded far away, shut behind thick walls. Nora's knees trembled.
Tell me.
Mara's eyes never left the darkness. A threshold mimic. The word landed like something from folklore, absurd and impossible and immediately believable in the worst way. "It comes to doors," Mara said. "Front doors first. Nursery doors if it has reason. Sickroom doors. It waits for invitation or imitation. It learns the house by being let in. It learns the people by being noticed." Owen whimpered again at the word nursery. Nora pressed a hand over his hair. "That's not possible." Mara gave a short, humorless laugh. "I agree." "Then what do you mean it learns us?" But Mara was already moving, sweeping the beam across the counters, the floor, the dark rectangle of the back door window. "How long has your son been talking to someone at night?" Nora stared. "How do you know about that?" Mara didn't answer.
How long? Months?
The word came out then.
Since maybe January. I thought it was...
He said there was a lady in the corner. Then he stopped saying lady and started saying nice babysitter. Mara shut her eyes for 1 second as if bracing against pain. Did he ever describe her? Nora remembered Owen sitting cross-legged on the bathroom floor while she brushed her teeth, casually telling her she hums when you cry in the shower. Owen with one hand on the nursery door saying she doesn't like Dad. Owen at breakfast, staring at the empty chair by the window and giggling because the babysitter says toast tastes like dust. Now, at the time, Nora had told herself all children invented companions from fragments off overheard adult language. She had not let herself notice the way he always looked above shoulder height when he spoke to it. Yes, Nora said. He said she had braids. The flashlight trembled in Mara's hand. Before Nora could ask why, the back door rattled hard in its frame. Both women jerked toward it. Something tapped gently on the glass. 3 knocks. Nora wanted to run, but there was nowhere left in her body to put panic. She could only watch as the flashlight beam crawled over the dark window. At first there was nothing. Then, as lightning flashed pale over the yard, she saw a face pressed to the glass from outside. Her ex-husband Elias, rain streamed down his cheeks. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His lips moved soundlessly, eyes wild with urgency. Nora took a step forward before Mara caught her shoulder like a vise.
No, it's him. No, it isn't.
The thing wearing Elias's face slammed both hands against the glass. The back door bowed inward with a crack. Owen shrieked. "Daddy!" The face outside changed at once. The panic vanished. The eyes softened. The mouth curved into that familiar, tired smile Elias used when he picked Owen up from school late and wanted forgiveness before he asked for it. "Buddy," it mouthed through the rain. The voice came next, not through the door, not muffled by weather, but directly behind them in the kitchen. "Open up," Elias said warmly. Nora spun. Nothing stood there. When she turned back, the thing at the glass had become someone else. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, cheeks pinched with concern, cardigan soaked by rain. "Nora!" she cried in a perfect imitation of the old woman's tremor. "I saw the lights. Honey, let me in." Then Owen. A tiny, terrified Owen beating his little fists against the door from outside in the storm, though the real boy was still locked around Nora's waist. The fake child's mouth opened too wide as it sobbed soundlessly. The glass cracked, from top to bottom. Mara cursed under her breath and yanked open a kitchen drawer. "Salt. Do you have salt?" "What? Salt?" Nora's thoughts scattered. She turned, fumbled open the pantry, found a cylinder of table salt and shoved it into Mara's hand. Mara twisted the cap off with her teeth and poured a thick white line across the tile between the kitchen and hallway. Then another in front of the back door. Then a rough circle around Nora and Owen. "What are you doing?" Nora said. "Buying time." The fake child outside had become Nora's mother now, dead 6 years and buried in Albany, knocking gently with her wedding ring against the fractured glass. "Nori," it said in the exact hoarse whisper the hospice drugs had left her with. "Please. It's so dark out here." Nora made a wounded sound and clapped a hand over her mouth. Mara grabbed her chin and forced her to look away from the door. "Listen to me. It will use whoever hurts best, whoever opens fastest. It wants the threshold. That is all. Do not answer it. Do not name it. Do not invite anything in or out. In or out. It moves both ways." A slow chill spread through Nora's stomach. "What does that mean?" Mara looked toward the ceiling. Above them from the second floor came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not one set. Several. Moving from room to room with measured patience. Nora stared upward. "There's no one else here." Mara's face told her that was no longer true. Something began knocking from inside the walls. Random creaks. Not plumbing. Knuckles. Deliberate and spaced. Traveling from one side of the kitchen to the other, as though whatever lived between the plaster and the lath was circling them in thought. Knock. Knock. Knocked, and from directly above Nora's head in the ceiling itself. "Mommy." Owen convulsed in her arms. The ceiling bulged downward for one nauseating second. The paint stretching like wet skin. A small handprint pressed out from beneath the plaster. Then another. Then another. Tiny. Child-sized crawling slowly across the ceiling toward them from the direction of the nursery. Nora began to sob. Mara seized the knife from the floor and shoved the flashlight into Nora's hand. "Hold this. Keep the beam on the salt line. If it breaks, tell me." Nora obeyed because obedience was easier than thought. The beam shook violently over the white line on the tile. For a moment nothing happened, then a dark wetness appeared at one edge of the circle. A drop. Then another. They were falling from the ceiling. Nora lifted the beam. The small handprints overhead had become black and glossy. As if tar seeped from them, the first droplet hit inside the circle with a fat, soft pat. It smoked faintly where it touched salt. An odor of rot bloomed through the kitchen. Mara whispered something under her breath and held up the silver knot on its chain. The metal had begun to glow not brightly, but with the dull internal redness of a coal under ash. The knocking in the walls stopped. Everything stopped. The house held one long, impossible breath. Then the front door slammed shut by itself. A moment later, From the dark living room beyond the hall, Nora heard the thing that had first come inside speak again in her own voice. "You chose the wrong one." Footsteps began moving toward the kitchen, slow, measured, not hiding anymore. And mixed among them, Nora realized with horror, were other steps answering from above coming down the stairs. The footsteps from the hall and the footsteps from the stairs did not sound like different people. They sounded like the same person arriving twice. Nora stood inside the salt circle with Owen in one arm and the flashlight trembling in the other, watching the kitchen doorway while the black drops from the ceiling hissed against white line at her feet. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, but there was no her left to go. The back door was cracking inward under the soft, patient knocks outside. The hall beyond the kitchen had gone lightless and deep, stretching into a darkness that did not belong to the dimensions of her house. And from inside that darkness came the sound of two identical sets of footsteps, perfectly measured, approaching from opposite directions. Mara stepped in front of Nora and raised the silver knot on its chain. The metal glowed a dull, bruised red. "Do not speak to it unless I tell you to," Mara said. "What if it speaks to me? It will." The first figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. It was Nora. Not the tired, frightened Nora standing barefoot on the tile, but a cleaner, crueler version of her, as if someone had reconstructed her from Owen's most vulnerable memories and every private shame she had ever swallowed. The copied face was pale and calm, her hair half-pinned the way she wore it at home. Her mouth set in that thin smile a child sees and immediately knows is not happiness.
One sleeve was rolled to the elbow.
On the wrist above the copied hand was the faded scar Nora had gotten at 17 from falling through a storm cellar window on her uncle's farm. Down to the scar, down to the small white crescent near the thumb. Stood with one hand against the doorframe and looked directly at Owen. "Come here, baby," it said in Nora's voice. "You don't need to be afraid of strangers." Owen made a sound Nora had never heard from him before. Something raw and cornered. He turned his face so hard into her shoulder it seemed he wanted to crawl inside her skin. Second figure entered from the hall behind them. Mara spun first and Nora followed too late. It was Mara now, same coat, same braid, same narrow face dampened by rain, but this version moved with a liquid puppet grace that made Nora's stomach twist. It had entered from the front of the house, where the first mimic had been. The copy and the door remained Nora. The copy behind them remained Mara. Between them, with the real Mara close enough to touch, the kitchen had become a mirror maze with only one correct reflection and no way for Nora to tell which one might break first. The false Mara smiled at the real one. "You still wear that?" it asked, looking at the chain. Its voice was nearly perfect. Only nearly. There was a wet undertone to it now, a softness like something talking through a throat full of mud. The real Mara said nothing. The copied Nora took one barefoot, stepped toward the salt line and stopped just short of it. She lowered herself slowly until she was crouching eye level with Owen, though the real Owen refused to look. "Mommy made a mistake," it said gently. "She let the wrong person inside." Nora's knees nearly buckled. That was her voice exactly. Not just the sound of it, but the rhythm. The little catch and mistake. The softening on inside. The copy wasn't only wearing her face. It had listened. It had archived. It had practiced. Mara shifted her stance by half an inch. "Do not answer." The copied Nora did not even glance at her. "She left you alone upstairs before," IT whispered to Owen. "Remember?" Nora's breath caught. A picture flashed through her mind. 6 months ago, carrying laundry from the dryer while Owen napped in the old nursery because his room was being painted. She had only been downstairs for 3 minutes, maybe 4. She had come back to find him awake, sitting upright in the crib mattress she'd placed temporarily on the floor. Staring into the corner with wide, solemn eyes, she had asked who he was looking at. He had smiled and said, "The nice babysitter." She had laughed it off. The copied Nora tilted her head with exquisite sympathy. "Remember when she closed the door and you cried?" "Owen," Nora said hoarsely before she could stop herself. Mara snapped.
"Don't."
Too late. Both copied faces turned toward Nora at once, their expressions sharpening with a kind of hungry attention. The copied Mara smiled wider. "There you are." The lights in the oven flickered weakly and died again. Something bumped once beneath the kitchen sink, then began scratching. "Not pipes. Not mice." Nora looked down in horror as the cabinet door shivered on its hinges. Something inside was dragging itself against the wood. "What is happening?" she whispered. Mara kept her eyes on the copies. "It's widening." "That doesn't mean anything. It means this house is no longer one house." The copied Mara laughed softly. "You always explain too much." The sound of it made the real Mara flinch. Nora saw it. A tiny reaction, but real.
Fear? Recognition?
The copied thing saw it too. Its head bent, considering her. Then it said, in a voice suddenly stripped of Nora's hearing and aimed somewhere deeper, "You should have drowned in the quarry with the others." The real Mara went still. Not tense. Not startled.
Still, Nora stared at her.
"What did it say?" Mara didn't answer. The copy continued, its smile deepening by imperceptible degrees. "You were 9. The rope snapped. Ellen said your name until her mouth filled with mud. Nora's skin turned to ice. The cabinet under the sink banged once from inside. Mara's hand tightened on the silver knot until her knuckles whitened. When she spoke, her voice was almost flat. "It digs," she said. "That is what it does. It finds the door you never shut inside yourself." The copied Nora rose to her full height again. "And you brought it here." "I was sent because it was already here." "No," the copy said. "You were sent because you fail in familiar places." The back door splintered, a white crack jumped across the center pane, and rain sprayed inward through it. Nora screamed and stumbled backward, nearly stepping across the salt line before Mara shoved her back into the circle.
Watch the line.
Mara barked. Nora forced the flashlight beam down. The white salt had begun to gray in spots where the black droplets struck it. Tiny gaps were appearing irregular. Dampened breaks no wider than fingers. The scratching under the sink turned frantic. The copied Nora watched the failing line and smiled.
"He opened it first, you know."
Nora looked up despite herself.
"Who?" "Your son," Owen whimpered in her arms. "No," Nora said at once.
No.
The copy's face softened into a terrible version of tenderness. Children speak invitations without knowing. That's why we like them. The words hit with the force of a physical blow. Nora flashed to all the nights Owen had sat awake in the nursery talking to the corner. All the morning she found his bedroom door open, though she'd latched it. The silly games he'd invented, tea parties for no one, hide and seek with an unseen friend, whispering into the dark and then waiting, smiling for an answer. She had thought loneliness, adjustment, imagination after the divorce.
What did he say?
Nora whispered. The thing wearing her face looked delighted. He said, "You can come in if you sing quieter." Owen let out a choked sob. "I didn't know." Nora nearly collapsed with him in her arms. "You were a baby," she said, though she wasn't sure whether she meant him or herself. The sink cabinet burst, opened, something small and pale unfolded onto the floor. At first Nora thought it was a child, and then she thought it was a large spider wearing a child. It moved on too many joints, elbows and knees bending with slick insect precision, anaerobe body wrapped in a cotton sleeper stained dark at the chest. Its head lolled sideways, revealing a patch of sparse hair pasted to a gray scalp. When it turned its face toward them, Nora gagged. It was a baby's face, or rather the memory of one. The features were too tiny, too unfinished, as if they had been formed by someone working from a poor description. The eyes were sealed shut by smooth skin. The nose was only 2 small black holes. The mouth, however, was perfect, a newborn's rosebud mouth, and when it opened, it revealed a row of tiny square teeth.
Who is that?
Nora cried. The copied Mara answered softly. One that didn't stay. The words struck somewhere ancient and buried. For a heartbeat Nora didn't understand. Then she did. 3 years before Owen was born, there had been another pregnancy. 10 weeks, maybe 11. There had been blood in the bathtub, and a hospital room that smelled of bleach and paper sheets, and Elias holding her hand too carefully like she might break. They had never named it. Never told anyone except her mother. Afterward, they had boxed the ultrasound printout and hidden it under winter blankets in the hall closet and gone on living because that is what people praised you for doing. The thing on the floor dragged itself toward the salt circle using all 4 limbs. Nora made a broken sound. "That isn't real," she said. The copied Nora gave her a look of unbearable pity. "Neither are you most days." The creature in the sleeper reached the salt and touched one tiny hand to the white line. Its skin blistered instantly. The smell that rose was sweet and rotten. Like milk left in heat, did not recoil. Instead, it smiled with those little square teeth and began to push harder, slowly forcing its chin through the smoking salt. The line blackened and parted.
Ma.
I see it. The real Mara lifted the chain and spoke again in that hard old language. This time the words came faster, like commands hammered onto iron. The metal knot burned brighter. The little creature spasmed as if struck, its limbs hammering the tile in a frenzy. The copied Nora and copied Mara both hystactually hissed, their mouths opening too far, their jaws slipping loose for a second before pulling back into human shape. The house answered. Every door on the first floor slammed at once. Above them, the footsteps multiplied. Nora looked up with horror. Shapes were moving across the ceiling now, not just handprints. Long, dragging shadows passed from room to room overhead, bulging the plaster in traveling ridges as if something were crawling between floors. Owen began to scream again and would not stop. The copied Mara turned its head upward, listening, then smiled at the real Mara with black amusement. "It heard you." "What heard me?" Nora shouted. Mara did not look at her. "The mother." The words seemed to alter the room. The darkness thickened in the corners. Rain struck the windows harder. Even the copies stilled for half a beat, as if in respect. Nora's mouth went dry. "There's more than one?" "There are pieces," Mara said. "Mouths. Hands. Children that listen at doors. But there is a larger thing behind them. There always is." The copied Nora nodded approvingly. "Much larger."
Something began descending the stairs, not footsteps this time.
Wait, a slow, heavy slide, like wet cloth being dragged one step at a time by many hands. The copied Nora closed her eyes in bliss.
"She's here."
Nora could not help. Ichi turned toward the hall. At first she saw only darkness beyond the kitchen doorway. Then the flashlight beam, shaking in her hand, trembled just enough to catch the bottom of the stairwell. Something pale rested there. A fold of flesh? Fabric? It was impossible to tell. It lay over 3 steps at once, 2 broad ends slack to belong to a person. Then it moved, and Nora realized what she was seeing was not one thing but many. Overlapping arms, or things like arms, pressed together in a slow-spilling mass. Along the underside of it blinked wet black eyes that opened and shut without lids. One of the arms gripped the banister from the wrong side. The copied Mara sighed, almost lovingly. "You remember her, don't you?" Mara's face emptied. Nora looked at her. "What does that mean?" Still Mara did not answer. The copied thing wearing Mara took a step closer to the salt. Its borrowed feature softened into something intimate. "She fed you from the quarry wall. She made you hold your breath inside her until your heart learned to knock politely." "Stop," the real Mara said, was the first true crack in her voice. The copy smiled. So did the copied Nora. Dara's mind raced through impossibilities and found none she could use. "Who are you?" she demanded of the real Mara. "Who did the agency send into my house?" Mara finally turned to her. In the weak flashlight beam, with black droplets falling around them and Owen shuddering in Nora's arms, she looked suddenly much younger and much older at once. Not in the face, but in the eyes, the exhausted, hunted look of someone who had spent a long time outrunning a thing that learned every door she crossed. "When I was 9, she said, "my village lost 7 children in one winter." The copied Mara watched with bright interest. Mara continued, each word seeming to cost her. "They were found near thresholds, barn doors, cellars, bedrooms, one in a church vestry. None of them had wounds anyone could explain, just expressions." She swallowed, as if something had asked them to open from, then sighed. The thing in the sleeper on the floor resumed, pushing through the broken salt line, burning and smiling. "My grandmother knew what it was," Mara said, "or thought she did. She said these things gather where grief is left standing open. Houses help them. Children help them more. They come in parts at first. A voice in the hall, a shape in the corner, a face at a window. Then EFT if invited enough." She looked toward the hall where the vast pale mass was still slowly descending. "Then a greater body forms." Nora stared. "And you?" "I am one of the people who are sent when families call agencies thinking they need a babysitter." That should have sounded absurd. In the kitchen it sounded almost sane. The copied Nora laughed softly. A blessed cover story. Nora's grip on Owen tightened. "You hunt these things?" Mara's expression darkened with something like self-disgust. We track them, delay them, sometimes close what they opened, sometimes burn houses. A beat. Mostly we arrive too late. A wet thump came from the hallway, then another. The pale mass had reached the bottom step. A smell rolled into the kitchen so foul Nora's vision blurred. Sweet milk, old blood, pond water, mold inside walls, the hot metallic scent of a labor room. Something huge was dragging itself across the hall floor just out of sight, guided by too many hands. The copied Nora turned her head toward it like a daughter listening for her mother's call. Then she looked back at Owen. "He invited me," she said gently, "but she kept me." Nora blinked. "Who?" The smile sharpened. "The one before me." The air seemed to leave the room. Nora looked at the real Mara. Mara did not deny it. No. Pieces began sliding together in Nora's mind with hideous precision. Owen saying the nice babysitter didn't like Dad. The thing in the nursery learning the layout of the house long before tonight. Mara arriving not surprised but late. The copy knowing the quarry, knowing the language, knowing exactly where to cut her. "You've been here before," Nora whispered. Mara's silence was answer enough. "How long?" Nora said. The thing in the sleeper suddenly lunged. Its burned little hand shot through the broken salt line and caught Nora's ankle with impossible strength. The skin of its fingers felt waxy and cold. Nora screamed and kicked, but it held on, grinning up at her with those tiny square teeth. The copied Nora opened her arms to Owen. "Come to me." The copied Mara stepped through the smoke where the line had weakened, and from the hallway, finally entering the kitchen on a slow tide of grasping limbs and blind-wit eyes, came the larger thing, the mother body bearing on its uppermost mass what looked horribly, unmistakably like a woman's bent, smiling face stretched across too much flesh. It spoke with the voices of every person Nora had loved. "Open," it said, and Owen, shaking in her arms, lifted his head, looked straight at it through tears, and whispered back, "I know you." The moment Owen said, "I know you," the thing in the kitchen shuddered with pleasure. Not a human reaction. Not even an animal one. The massive body dragging itself through the hall trembled the way a pond trembles when something enormous rises beneath it. The overlapping arms flexed. Blind, wet eyes opened and shut along folds of flesh. The smiling face stretched across the topmost mass widened until the cheeks split at the corners with a sound like cloth tearing, and every voice inside it laughed. Nora clamped both hands over Owen and staggered backward. But the room had already begun to change. The kitchen seemed to lengthen. The ceiling pulled higher. The walls swelled outward with slow breathing of something alive. The cabinets shivered on their hinges as if trying to shake themselves free of the house. Every threshold in Nora's line of sight, the kitchen doorway, the pantry door, the laundry room, the splintering back door, even the dark rectangle beneath the table where chair legs framed little shadowed openings seemed suddenly deeper than they should have been. Each one a mouth pretending to bear texture. The small thing in the sleeper still clung to Nora's ankle, smiling up at her while its blistered fingers tightened. She kicked again and felt one tiny wrist snap under her heel. It did not let go.
"Make him stop talking,"
Mara shouted. "I'm trying." But Owen had gone strangely still in Nora's arms, his tear-wet face lifted toward the mother thing with the blank entranced focus of a sleepwalker. His lips parted. His pupil shad widened until his irises were only thin blue rings. "I know your song," he whispered.
No.
Nora cupped his face hard enough to make him wince.
"Owen."
"Look at me." He didn't. The mother shifted forward, arms bunching and unfolding with slick, obscene grace. More of it entered the kitchen, and Nora saw that the central body was not flesh in any normal sense. It was made of gathered pieces. Faces pressed half-formed in its surface as thaw trapped just beneath a membrane. Small hands emerged and disappeared. Teeth surfaced in places where no mouths existed. The smiling woman's face at the top seemed less like a head and more like a mask worn by the larger mask because it understood a mother's face was the first door in every child's life. Dart rain lashed the broken back door. The house groaned around them. Mara seized the thing in the sleeper by the back of its stained cotton neck and tore it off Nora's ankle with a wet, ripping noise. It shrieked in a newborn's voice. Mara flung it into the open oven and kicked the door shut. Instantly, the creature began battering itself against metal from inside, each thud accompanied by high, thin cries that sounded horribly close to human pain. Nora almost dropped Owen from sheer shock. Mara rounded on her. Listen to me. Nora did, because Mara's face had become frightening in a different way now. Not monstrous, but stripped down to necessity. Rainwater clung to her lashes. Blood, someone's blood, maybe not hers, streaked one temple. The silver knot burned in her fist so hot that thin white smoke rose from between her fingers. It knows him, Mara said. That means it has had him in dreams. In play, in the space before sleep. If he answers too much, it can take his shape from the inside out. Nora's heart lurched. Take, what does that mean? Mara looked once at Owen, and whatever she saw there made her voice drop. It means when morning comes, you may still have a child in your house, but not your child. The copied Nora smiled softly. That's cruelly put. The copied Mara had moved fully inside the kitchen now, stepping through the weak smoke rising from the broken salt line. Up close, the imitation was nearly perfect except for one thing Nora had been too panicked to notice before. Its feet made no sound at all, even on shattered glass.
Why are you helping them?
Nora shouted at the real Mara, the accusation tearing out Ophor before she could stop it. You said you've been here before. I have. How long? The mother dragged one more swollen span of itself over the hall floor. Nails, hundreds off nails, perhaps human and otherwise scraped wood. The sound went through Nora's teeth. Mara did not look away from it. The first time I came to this house, she said, you were still pregnant. Nora stared. The words did not land. They hovered in the air, impossible. Then the copied Nora laughed gently and everything inside Nora collapsed. You sat in the nursery, the copy said in Nora's voice, folding tiny blue socks and crying because you were afraid to be happy too soon. Flash. A hot June afternoon. Windows open. The old nursery painted soft yellow then, before Owen was born and before the room became storage and silence. Nora on the floor with a basket of baby clothes. A woman from an agency standing in the doorway because Eliashad insisted Nora stop lifting boxes and accept help organizing. The different hairstyle maybe. Or maybe the same braid and Nora never truly saw it. A vague memory of a kind face, a gray cardigan, a voice saying, Don't worry, I'm very good with babies. Nora's stomach turned to water. No, she whispered. Mara's eyes closed for half a second. It had already marked the house. I was supposed to clear it before the birth. The copied Mara clicked her tongue.
Supposed to. Nora's voice came out thin and jagged.
And? Mara opened her eyes.
And I failed.
The oven door buckled outward with a crash from the thing trapped inside. Tiny fist jammered the metal. Nora's mind reeled through memories now sharpening into something deadly. The miscarriage before Owen. The cold spots in the nursery. The way Elias once joked the baby monitor picked up a woman singing from a station that didn't exist. The night late in her third trimester when she woke, certain someone had been standing beside the bed, no-douching her, just listening to her breathe.
What did you do?
Nora asked. Mara's answer came quietly. I closed what I could and thought the rest had starved. The copied Nora smiled at Owen. But he was born hungry enough for both sides. Owen whimpered, as if hearing that somewhere far away. His eyes remained fixed on the mother. She sang when I had a fever, he murmured. Nora's hands shook so hard she could barely hold him.
Baby, no.
Don't listen. She said the wall's open if you're good. The mother body rippled in delight. Faces surfaced in its flesh, mouths opening soundlessly. One looked like Elias. One looked like Nora's dead mother. One looked horribly like Nora herself as a little girl. Mara took one hard step toward Owen and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the kitchen. Nora gasped in outrage, but the effect was immediate. Owen blinked once, twice, and the glazed depth in his eyes faltered. He sucked in a sobbing breath like someone hauled suddenly to the surface. Mommy? Nora almost collapsed with relief. I'm here. The mother shrieked. The sound came from every mouth inside it and from the walls and from under the floorboards and perhaps from inside Nora's own ribcage. The window over the sink blew inward in a spray of glass. Wind howled through the kitchen. The flashlight died and Nora Shandad darkness swallowed them. Only the silver knot in Mara's fist still glowed, a coal-red bruise floating in black. Down! Mara shouted. Nora threw herself over Owen as something huge slammed across the kitchen where Hairhead had been a heartbeat before. Chair legs shattered. The table tipped. Ceramics exploded against tile. The thing in the oven shrieked louder, battering the door from Thane's side until the hinges screamed. Nora crawled blindly, one hand over Owen's neck, the other groping through broken glass and spilled water. Her palm found the drop knife again. She snatched it up. To her left, something breathed. Not close, inside the pantry. The door stood slightly ajar. From the crack came that smell of wet soil and iron and old milk. A small voice spoke from within. "Mommy," it said. Then another voice layered under it. "Mommy." Then a third and a fourth, dozens now, all children, all whispering from the dark shelves behind canned beans and cereal boxes. "Mommy, Mommy." Nora squeezed her eyes shut so hard stars burst behind them. "Mara, I'm here." The red glow moved somewhere ahead of her. Then stopped. When Mara spoke again, her voice was wrong, not copied wrong, but wounded. Tight, chalked.
No. Nora looked up.
In the glow, the copied Mara stood directly in front of the real one. Only now the copy wasn't copying anymore. The face had opened. Not split opened. The features parting along hidden seams. Eyes unfolding sideways. The smile peeling upward to reveal a vertical black cavity lined with tiny inward-pointing teeth beneath the borrowed human skin. Other arrangements shifted impatiently, as if it could no longer be bothered to maintain the disguise. And from that opening, in a child's thin voice, it said, "Mama." Mara staggered back as if struck. The mother in the hall stilled. Even the whispering in the pantry ceased. Nora felt the air change. Not colder, more intimate. As if the house had leaned close to hear. The false thing took one silent step toward Mara. "You left me in the quarry." Mara's face drained of color. Nora stared at her. "What is it saying?" Mara did not answer. The copied thing's opening widened. And deep within the darkness of it, Nora saw, impossibly, the shape of a little girl's face. Water swollen, mud at the lips. Hair drifting like pendweed. One eye shut, one eye open. "Mara," it whispered. "You held the rope." The real Mara made a small sound that was almost a moan. Nora understood only pieces now, but enough of them arranged themselves with merciless speed. The quarry. The dead children. The copy knowing too much. The way the mother had paused when called. The thing calling Mara Mama not as an animal mimicry but as accusation. "You weren't sent because you tracked them," Nora said, horror blooming fresh inside her. "You were sent because they know you." Mara's eyes flicked to her. "In my village," she said hoarsely, "we thought if one child was given, the others might be spared." Nora's entire body went cold. "No. I was 9. No." They tied the rope around her waist. The thing wearing the ruined imitation of Mara smiled with the little dead girl's mouth buried inside it. "Ellen," Mara whispered. The name moved through the room like a key turning. The mother body surged forward at once. Everything happened too fast. Arms slammed into the doorway. The broken salt line vanished beneath a flood of grasping hands. The oven door ripped off its hinges and the thing in the sleeper sprang free, landing spider-like on the ceiling above Nora. The pantry doors burst open. Tiny pale faces peered from inside among the canned food and paper towels, mouths working soundlessly. The copied Nora lunged straight for Owen. Nora screamed and slashed upward with the knife. The blade entered the copied face just below the jaw. For a heartbeat there was resistance like thick rubber. Then the skin split, and black fluid sprayed hot across Nora's hand. The copied Nora jerked back, but instead of blood, what poured from the wound was hair. Long wet hair, endless and writhing, spilling from the cutin ropes and coils. Slapping the tile and crawling over the cabinets like living seaweed. Nora dropped the knife and stumbled away, choking as strands wrapped around her wrist. Mara began shouting in that old language again, louder now, furious and desperate. The silver knot flared from red to white-hot gold. The room filled with the smell of something antient burning, not wood, not flesh, but memory itself. As if old names were catching fire. The mother shrieked and reared. In its heaving surface, Nora saw more faces surfacing and sinking. One was her lost pregnancy, or what her guilt imagined it might have become. One was Elias. One was Nora's own face from tonight. And near the center, emerging only for a second before being swallowed again, was the face of a little girl with river-dark hair and one ruined eye. Aylin. The copied thing wearing Mara's shape collapsed to all fours, its limbs turning backward with wet pops.
She promised, it cried in that child's.
She promised she wouldn't let go. Mara's shout broke. For the first time since this began, the real Mara looked like someone who wanted to die. The mother took advantage instantly. One thick arm composed of many smaller arms shot forward, seized Mara around the waist, and yanked her toward the doorway. The silver knot slipped from her hand and skidded across the tile to Nora's feet.
Mara.
Nora shouted. Mara slammed both palms into the floor to keep from being dragged fully into the mother's mass. Too many fingers closed over her legs, her coat, her hair. From within Thething, voices poured out in overlapping layers. You left me. You chose. You opened. You are the first door. Come back in. Nora grabbed the silver knot. The metal hit her skin like a stove burner. She almost dropped it. But the moment she touched it, something flashed through her. Not words, not exactly, but a shape of understanding. Thresholds.
Name.
Invitation. Bloodline. The terrible simple law of it. What is opened by the child may be shut by the mother, but only if the mother chooses which side of the door to lose. The knowledge vanished as fast as it came, leaving Nora gasping. Mara looked up at her from the floor, half inside a writhing nest of arms. Somehow, through pain and panic and all the years of guilt clawing at her face, she understood what Nora had learned. Her eyes widened. No, Mara said. But Nora was already turning toward the old nursery. Because above the chaos, above the mother screaming and the shattering dishes and Owen's sobs, she had finally remembered the red ribbon on the rocking chair. Marker. A center, the first. Room it truly entered, the first room she let it near a child. The room where every wrong thing in. This house had learned to sing. The nursery door upstairs creaked open by itself, and from that dark room came a lullaby. Soft. Patient. Familiar. Owen lifted his tear-streaked face and whispered, "That's where she waits." Mara, still being dragged inch by inch into the mother's body, looked at Nora with naked horror. "If you go up there," she choked out, "one of you is not coming back." Nora tightened her grip on the burning silver knot, hauled Owen close against her chest, and stared toward the stairs as the lullaby drifted down like cold milk through the dark. Then the singing voice changed. It became hers, and from the nursery above, Nora heard herself call softly, "Bring him to me." Nora ran toward the stairs because there was nothing else left to do. Not bravely. Not with a plan she trusted. She ran because the lullaby from the nursery had found the exact shape of her own voice and fit inside it. Because the silver knot burned in her palm like a live nerve, because Mara was being dragged a little farther every second into the mother's writhing body. And because Owen was clinging to her with all the blind faith children have in the person who may already be failing them. Behind her, the kitchen came apart. The mother shrieked in a choir of stolen voices. Cabinet doors ripped from their hinges. Theovan toppled forward. Mara shouted something guttural and old, the syllables breaking under pain as she kicked against the nest of hands pulling her toward the doorway. The copied Nora slithered across the floor in a tide of black hair. The dead little thing in the sleeper clung to the ceiling directly above them, teeth clicking like tiny piano keys. None of it mattered more than the stairs. Nora hit the first step hard enough to jar Owen in her arms. He cried out, fingers knotting in her shirt. She nearly slipped on rainwater or something colder and thicker than rain. The tad begun to run down from the landing above. It touched her bare foot and made her gasp. Not water. It felt like bathwater long after the body had gone cold. The upstairs hallway waited in moonlit silence. Below, the first floor had become a living mouth of screams and splintering wood, but up her the house was terribly, reverently quiet. The wallpaper glowed faintly blue under thelite from the landing window. The nursery door stood wide open now, breathing darkness into the hall. The rocking chair inside moved back and forth in a slow, patient rhythm. Nora stopped 3 steps from the threshold. Every hair on her body lifted. The room smelled like baby powder and mildew and blood diluted in warm water. Not fresh blood, memory blood. The scent of panic trapped in old fabric. Around the doorframe, half hidden by shadow, faint marks scarred the wood. Little scratches, little crescents. As though something with tiny nails had once gripped there and been pulled away. The lullaby had stopped. Owen stared into the room over Nora's shoulder, his face wet and pale. "She's there," who whispered. Nora could not yet see anyone. Only the old nursery, emptied of life years ago and somehow fuller than ever now. The dismantled crib, the stacked boxes, The moonlight on the curtains. The rocking chair with red ribbon still lying across its seat. The silver knot in Nora's hand pulsed once with heat. Understanding flickered again. Incomplete but urgent. Not words, never words, but instincts arranged by something older than language. The ribbon mattered. The chair mattered. The room had become a hinge. A place where invitation had been repeated until the house learned it. A threshold fed enough times becomes a mouth behind Nora. Something wet and heavy began dragging itself up the stairs. She turned. Half the mother's mass had already reached the landing below, pouring itself upward by means of overlapping hands and blind opening eyes. Mara was still caught in it from the waist down, face white with agony, both palms braced against the steps. The copied Mara moved beside the larger body on all fours, her human skin sloughing visibly now. And yet that something slick and pale and many-jointed worked eagerly forward. The copied Nora came after them in a low glide, hair spreading over the stair risers like oil. "Nora," Mara cried, and her voice cracked into rawness. "Do it now." "What do I do?" Mara looked at Owen, then at the room, then at Nora's hand clutching the knot. And because she knew, because perhaps she had always known and run from it, Sheen's word with naked horror: "Close the first invitation." Nora stared at her. "That was years ago. In this house?" Mara coughed a laugh that was almost a sob. "Nothing in this house is years ago." The mother opened all its mouths at once, stopped from the stairwell, from the hall below, from inside the walls and the floor and the dark cracks of the nursery. Voices poured out in overlapping waves. "Bring him in. Bring him back. Bring him home. Only mothers may enter with children. Only children may open for mothers." Owen whimpered and buried his face in Nora's neck. The weight rising behind them gathered itself. Nora stepped into the nursery. The temperature dropped so fast her teeth struck together. The darkness in the corners off the room seemed thicker than any shadow deserved to be, almost material. The rocking chair continued moving. Forward, back, forward. The red ribbon trembled on the seat with each motion. Though there was no wind, Nora crossed to it on numb legs. The room changed as she moved. The boxes by the wall became translucent for a second, revealing shapes behind them that did not belong there, small bent figures kneeling in rows, heads lowered. The curtain stirred, and she saw not fabric but hospital partitions fluttering in a draftless room. The nursery walls breathed outward, and in their breathing she heard women weeping in different years. She reached for the ribbon. The hand closed over hers. Nora screamed. The woman standing beside the chair was herself, not the copied Nora from downstairs. This was closer, worse. It was Nora as she had been the night after her miscarriage, face blanched hollow, hair damp with sweat, hospital bracelet still on one wrist, eyes swollen from hours of not yet crying because the real crying had not come until she got home and saw the folded baby clothes in the drawer. That sight of that version of herself hit so hard Nora thought she might faint. The figure smiled sadly. "Don't take it." Its voice was hers, but older somehow. Exhausted into tenderness, Nora's own voice came out thin. "You aren't real." "Neither is grief," the figure said. "It still keeps a room." The hand on Nora's wrist tightened not violently, just enough to stop her. Its skin was cool and dry. Human enough to destroy her resolve. Downstairs, Mara screamed. The nursery windows rattled hard in their frames. Owen lifted his head. He was staring not at the woman beside the chair, but at the far corner of the room near the closet. "There's another one," he whispered. Nora looked. Something was seated on the floor in the corner with its knees drawn up under the shadow line. Small. Child-sized. The moonlight did not fully touch it. She could only make out strands of dark wet hair and the shine of one open eyelid. The little girl. From the quarry. Or what remained where the house had worn her memory thin. The child's mouth opened. Mud-black water slid out over her chin. "She let go," the little girl said. Mara made a sound in the hallway like someone being cut open. The woman holding Nora's wrist, the grieving version of Nora, leaned closer. "Don't listento them. Keep him with you. Leave the room. Lock it. Burn the house later. You can still save one thing. One thing." The words struck like a hook. Not both. One. The silver knot burned hotter, as if in refusal. Nora tried to pull away. The figure's grip became stronger instantly. Stronger than it should have been. The sad face did not change, but something beneath the skin shifted. The eyes darkened, becoming reflective, beetle black. "You already lost one child here," it said. "Do not lose another trying to be good." Nora froze. It knew exactly where to cut. In the corner, Elin lifted her head. The ruined eye stayed shut. The good eye watched Nora with unbearable clarity. "Do not make another bargain," the little girl whispered. Behind Nora, the mother body struck the nursery door. The whole frame bowed inward with a thunderous crack. Mara shouted from the hall, voice ragged. "Nora!" The copied things were at the threshold now. Nora could feel them without looking, gathered in the doorway like patient guests waiting to be invited past the final inch. The woman by the chair smiled with Nora's mouth, and Nora finally understood what was wrong with the smile. It was not hunger. It was permission. This room had never only been where the thing entered. This was where mothers were taught to choose. Nora looked down at Owen. He was shivering. Eyes huge, one small hand gripping the chain of the silver knot where it hung out between her fingers. He did not understand the rules, not fully. He only understood that everyone who loved him became dangerous in this house. "Mommy," he said, voice breaking, "I don't want the nice babysitter anymore." Something inside Nora hardened not into courage, exactly, but into decision. She turned the silver knot in her hand and drove its glowing edge straight through the ribbon pinned on the rocking chair. The room screamed. Not the house. The room, the sound came from the walls, the floorboards, the empty crib pieces, the closet, the curtains, the yellowing paint, as if every year of trapped invitation tore at once. The ribbon ignited in a burst of white fire. The rocking chair snapped backward and struck the wall hard enough to splinter both runners. The figure holding Nora's wrist convulsed, its face shredded like wet paper in wind. Beneath it was a smooth, pale oval with the smile. The little girl in the corner screamed too, but not in rage. In release. Mud-black water poured from her mouth and eyes and soaked into the floorboards. The open eye never left Mara in the hall. The mother hit the doorway again. This time the frame exploded inward. Arms flooded the room. Faces pushed through one another in panic. The copied Mara let out an animal shriek as the white fire leapt from the ribbon to her skin. The copied Nora burst into streaming black hair and collapsed writhing across the floor.
"Nora!" Mara. "Now!"
The fire had spread from the chair to the nursery threshold itself, tracing a jagged line along the wood. The instinct returned in a clear, terrible shape. A threshold opened by invitation must be closed by blood freely given from the side. The tin vitted it. The mother understood at the same moment. All its voices became one.
"No."
The words shook dust from the ceiling. Nora looked from the burning threshold to Owen, then to Mara. Mara knew. The recognition on her face was instant and devastating. Half her body was still tangled in the mother's grasp. The little girl, Ellen, whatever remnant of her had existed, was fading in the corner, dissolving into damp darkness and moonlight. Mara saw that too. "No," Mara said again, but this time to Nora. Pleading, not him. Nora's voice surprised her by how steady it was.
"Not him."
She shifted Owen higher on her hip, kissed the side of his head once, and set him down inside the nursery closet. It was the only space in the room the white fire had not yet touched. He started to cry at once. "Mommy, no!" She knelt and held his face between both hands. "Listen to me, sweetheart. No matter what you hear, you stay in here until it gets quiet. Then you go to Mara." He shook his head frantically.
"No, no, no."
"You go to Mara," she repeated. "Do you understand?" Children understand tone long before fate. His sobbing changed, became wild, desperate. "Come with me." Nora kissed his forehead.
"I love you."
Then she shut the closet door on his screaming. She turned before she could undo herself. The mother had forced half its body into the nursery now, burning where the threshold fire touched it, but still advancing. Hands clawed the floorboards. Faces stretched and tore in its mass. The copied things screamed as they died, sloughing into hair, mud, teeth, and infant bones that blackened instantly in the white flame. Mara dragged herself up the wall by her hands alone, trying to reach Nora. There may be another way, but Nora knew there wasn't. Or maybe there was, in some older language, in some colder house. For some mother Ho had noticed sooner and grieved less sloppily and never once let loneliness choose for her. But not here, not tonight. Not after all the small doors left open. The threshold fire waited. The silver knot fused into Nora's palm. She looked once at Mara.
"Take him out of this house." Mara's face broke.
Nora stepped backward into the burning threshold. Pain, unlike anything in her life, tore through her at once. Not flesh pain. Not only that. It felt as if every open grief in her body had caught fire together: the hospital room, the divorce, the nights of exhausted resentment. The terrible private moments when she had wanted motherhood to stop needing so much from her. All of it burning white and clean and merciless. She screamed and kept stepping. The mother lunged. Its largest arm, composed of many smaller reaching arms, shot toward her throat. Nora drove the silver knot into the center of the smiling face atop the mass. The thing convulsed. For one frozen second, every stolen face surfaced at once across its body: Elias, her mother Mara, Owen, the lost unborn child Elin. Strangers, children, old women, men never seen. Every mouth opened in soundless terror. Then the threshold closed. It did not slam, it drew inward. The room folded toward the line of burning wood as though the nursery had been made of paper and someone pinched it at the middle. The mother's body screamed in reverse. Faces sucked down into flesh, flesh sucked into smoke, smoke sucked into the bright wound of the closing threshold. The floorboards split. The walls bowed. Glass blew outward into the night. Mara hurled herself toward the closet and ripped the door open just as the white fire reached it. Owen threw himself at her. Screaming for Nora, Mara caught him and rolled. The nursery collapsed behind them, into rubble, into absence. One instant there was a room. The next there was only a black vertical seam hovering where the doorway had been, thin as a blade, bright at the edges, drinking light. In its center, for a fraction of a second longer than any mercy required, Owen could still see Nora. She stood inside impossible darkness, one hand lifted toward him. Her face no longer terrified, only sorry. Then the seam sealed. The force of it threw Mara and Owen halfway down the hall. The house groaned like a ship breaking under ice. And then everything stopped. No screams. No voices. No knocking in the walls. No weight on the stairs. Only rain. Only the ordinary ragged sound of a child sobbing until he choked. Mara lay on the hallway floor, holding him while moonlight crept across the wallpaper and the old house settled into the first true silence it had known in years. The official fire report blamed faulty wiring in the upstairs walls. There had been damage, but not as much as there should have been. The nursery was simply not burned, not caved in. The measurements of the second floor no longer made sense. Contractors said the back wall had shifted inward decades worth of inches overnight. Insurance investigators stared at blueprints and frowned. No one could explain why the hallway outside the missing room remained untouched, or why the wood along the former doorway was smooth and blackened as if polished by heat no known fuel had made. Elias came when he heard. He tried to take Owen at first, horrified by the vacant look in the boy's eyes. The way he woke shrieking from dreams and would not sleep unless every closet door in the house was nailed shut. But Owen would not leave Mara. Not even to use the bathroom. Not even when Elias begged. Mara stayed because there was nowhere else to put either of them. She made practical arrangements with the numb precision of the guilty. Repairs, paperwork, funerary absence for someone with no body to bury. She moved through those days like a person walking under deep water. Elias hated her on sight without knowing why. Perhaps some part of him recognized the type of silence she carried. Owen never again used the phrase "nice babysitter" for months. He refused to go near any threshold alone. He would leap over door jambs, followed, crying if his foot touched the strip of wood between rooms. Mara taught him games instead. Knock and enter, step and count, name what is yours before crossing. Small rituals disguised as play. He learned them too well. Children do. Spring came. The house was sold at a loss to a couple from out of state who loved the old world. Sherman didn't mind the oddly narrowed second floor. Mara fought hard enough to delay it, no third enough to stop it. There are always other houses, always other families who think relief has finally arrived because someone kind is standing on the porch in a gray coat with a patient smile. She took Owen north with her in the end, not because she believed she deserved him, because Nora had asked. Years passed. The nightmares lessened, then changed shape. Owen grew taller. Learned to read. Learned not to ask questions about certain pauses in Mara's face. He remembered his mother in fragments. At first the smell of her shampoo, The way she peeled apple slice because he insisted, the pressure of her lips on his forehead before a door shut. Later he remembered more. Enough to grieve properly. Enough to grow dangerous in the way all children touched by old things become dangerous. Observant, quiet, listening to corners longer than other people do. On the night before his 10th birthday, he woke Mara by standing in her doorway. He was too old by then to cry from bad dreams. He only stood there pale and still, one hand wrapped around the frame. "Mara," he said. Something in his tone made her sit up immediately.
What is it?
He looked down the hall behind him. "There's a lady at the front door." Mara was out of bed before the last word left his mouth. The silver knot never slept far from her hand now. She took it from the bedside table and crossed the dark house in 3 silent steps for every one of Owen's. The front hall was empty. No knocking. No voice. Only the moonlight through frosted glass and the draft that old houses always seem to have. Mara stood listening until her pulse slowed. Then she saw it. On the narrow table by the door, where she kept her keys and the unopened mail, lay a single red ribbon tied into a neat bow. Fresh. Dry. Waiting. Owen inhaled sharply behind her. Mara closed her hand over the silver knot so hard the old scar in her palm split open. In the frosted glass of the front door, just for an instant, a reflection formed that did not belong to either of them. A woman with tired eyes, barefoot. One hand lifted as if in warning or blessing. Then the reflection was gone. The knocking started a second later. 3 soft taps. Mara did not move toward the door. Neither did Owen. But when the voice came from the other side, quiet and familiar and full of all the love that can ruin a person, Owen began to shake. "Sweetheart," Nora said through the wood, "it's Mommy. Open the door."